Hello everyone, my name is Abigail and on behalf of the organisers Oliver Kinross, I'd like to welcome you all to London Built Online. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our sponsors with special mention of DuPont, our sponsor of today's webinar. Today's session will kickstart with a short presentation by Mike Demko, followed by a panel discussion on healthcare, design, facilities and interiors, moderated by Velimira Drummer and joined by our fantastic lineup of panelists. There'll be plenty of time for Q&A throughout the session, so do take the opportunity to submit your questions in the questions box on your screen. I hope you all enjoyed today's session, and I'd like to hand over to you now, Mike.
Great, thank you. All right. All right, can everyone see my screen? So
yeah, that's
I'm Mike
through
Demko.
fine.
Great, thank you. I'm Mike Demko. I'm the application development leader for DuPont Tedlar, and I'd like to talk today about surface protection in a healthcare environment. So to motivate this talk, we can start by thinking about a healthcare facility. And let's think about a patient room. And we can ask the question, who visits this room? Now, it doesn't take much thought to come up with a fairly extensive list of who visits this room. First of all, there's a patient who is recovering from an issue or ailment and is going to be spending a period of time of days or weeks in this room. You have their care staff of doctors and nurses that are going to be visiting the patient frequently, discussing treatment options, doing routine tests, and providing treatment. In normal times, there's family and visitors that would come into the facility from outside and visit the patient. There's the catering staff bringing meals 3 times a day and then coming in 3 times a day to clean up and take the trays away. The janitorial staff keeping the room neat and clean, and then the maintenance staff keeping the facilities in good working order. And as we think about these healthcare facilities, we quickly realize that even the patient room, even a private patient room, is a high traffic area. And just about every surface in this room is a high touch surface. So there are some additional visitors to this room: bacteria, viruses, and fungi, pathogens. So the reason we care about pathogens is because of healthcare-acquired infections. So a healthcare-acquired infection is defined as an illness acquired while being treated for another issue in a hospital or healthcare facility. And these can take a variety of different forms. There's bacteria, fungi, viruses, and the list I have on the right side of the screen is some of the pathogens that are of highest concern to a healthcare facility. And what you'll find on this list, there's some that are resistant to antibiotics and are multi-drug resistant, and some that have a relatively high lethality rate. Now, a healthcare-acquired infection, if you're in a hospital, you're there because you're recovering from some issue. So having a healthcare-acquired infection is really the last thing you want in order to have a good patient outcome. And what's surprising is that these healthcare-acquired infections will affect between 4 and 12% of patients in developed countries. And in Europe, that rate is 7%. Now, there's a cost to this. So there's a human cost in that this will lead to tens of thousands of deaths, and there's a financial cost that it costs billions of dollars to treat these healthcare-acquired infections each year. And that data is just for the US alone. Worldwide, of course, the numbers are higher. What's also very surprising, according to the World Health Organization, healthcare-acquired infections will surpass cancer as the #1 killer by 2050. So how do we combat healthcare-acquired infections? Well, the solution is cleaning and disinfecting. So cleaning is the process of removing dirt, debris, and organic matter from a surface in order to restore the original surface aesthetic. Now, this is important because it makes the patient feel as if they are in a clean and safe environment. But cleaning also eliminates dirt, debris, and organic matter, which can impede direct contact between a disinfectant and a surface, or a disinfectant and a pathogen. Dirt, debris, and organic matter on a surface can also inactivate the germicidal properties or mode of action of several disinfectants. So it's very important to remove this dirt, debris, and organic matter before disinfecting. Now, it's important to realize also that cleaning does not kill or destroy pathogens. And in fact, cleaning can spread these pathogens around your facility. So it's very important to follow cleaning with disinfecting. So again, disinfecting is the process of killing or destroying pathogens, and it can take a variety of different formats. There's chemicals, UV light, steam, or chemical vapor treatment. Most often for day-to-day disinfecting, chemical treatments are used. Things like quaternary ammoniums, alcohol, bleach, hydrogen peroxide, or acids. So what does a disinfection strategy look like? Well, it depends. It depends on what you're trying to manage. There are certain pathogens like bacterial spores, mycobacteria, non-lipid viruses, and fungi, which are very difficult to kill, and they require harsh disinfectants. So things like peroxyacetic acid, hydrogen peroxide, hypochlorites. There are other pathogens that are much easier to kill, bacteria and lipid viruses like COVID-19. These can be handled with much more mild disinfectants like alcohol or quaternary ammoniums. There's also supplemental no-touch disinfectants that are sometimes used, for example, in terminal cleaning of a room. UVC light at 254 nanometers, hydrogen peroxide vapor, or steam can sometimes be used. What's important to note is that there's no silver bullet for disinfecting strategies. There's no one material that we can use as a disinfectant. Each pathogen requires a different treatment. And your disinfection strategy is a balance of the risk that the pathogen poses to your staff and your patients, the disinfectant toxicity, and the risk of damaging all the materials in your healthcare facility. So let's take an example. So this is a normal cleaning and disinfection procedure for COVID-19, and it's taken from the World Health Organization. So they are recommending chemical disinfections for COVID-19. 70 to 90% ethanol, chlorine-based products, or hydrogen peroxide. Each cleaning cycle requires a minimum of 1 minute of contact time. They also suggest that supplemental disinfection can be used for terminal cleaning of a room using UV irradiation at 254 nanometers or vaporized hydrogen peroxide. Now, the frequency of this cleaning, for screening and triage areas, they recommend twice daily. For inpatient rooms, 3 times daily. Hallways and corridors, twice daily. Outpatient rooms, after each and every patient. So this is actually a lot of abuse on the materials that are being disinfected. And the question is, do the materials in the healthcare facility stand up to this level of abuse? So this is a great time to introduce Tedlar. So Tedlar is a brand name for a highly versatile polyvinyl fluoride film that provides a long-lasting finish to a wide range of surfaces in harsh environments. And the chemical structure of polyvinyl fluoride is shown at the bottom right of the screen. So it's a linear chain of carbon atoms that are saturated with hydrogen, and one hydrogen in each repeat unit is substituted for a fluorine. And the fluorine atom is very electronegative, so it pulls electrons towards itself, and that tends to stabilize all the other bonds in that molecule, making it extremely inert and extremely chemically resistant. So for a healthcare facility, what this means is that staining agents will tend to sit on the surface of the film where it's easy to wipe them away. They don't penetrate in and leave staining. And then when it comes time to clean and disinfect, there are actually no known solvents for this material at room temperature. So you can use the harshest chemical and no-touch cleaning methods without risk of damaging the Tedlar. So Tedlar Pvf film is actually a thin film that's used as a surface glazing. It's sometimes used on its own, but more often than not, it's applied to substrates. So for example, if you take a transparent Tedlar film, apply it to a printed PVC backing using an adhesive, you laminate, you emboss to give the surface a nice texture. That would be how you would make a DuPont Tedlar wall covering. Alternatively, if I take Tedlar, adhere it to a substrate and thermoform it, or take Tedlar and vacuum form it around a part, you can get three-dimensional parts like furniture and cabinetry. So the value of Tedlar in healthcare interiors. First and foremost is easy cleaning. So the fluoropolymer is stain resistant. Staining agents tend to stay on the surface. And even if that staining agent is left on the surface for 24 hours or longer, it's easy to remove it without leaving any stain or ghosting behind. The Tedlar is easy to clean and disinfect because it's resistant to a very wide variety of cleaning agents and disinfectants, including bleach, alcohol, ketones, even strong acids and bases. Now for disinfection, PVF is also resistant to UV light, including UV light at 254 nanometers, which has a tendency to really damage other polymer materials. So if it's used in a healthcare environment where UVC light is used, the PVF will retain its low color and retain its gloss. It's also a flame-resistant material. So it's a non-flammable material with low smoke toxicity, and for that reason, it's been used extensively in aircraft interiors. And for indoor air quality, the Tedlar is mold and bacteria resistant. Since the material is naturally flexible, we don't need processing aids or additives that would otherwise provide nutrients for mold or bacteria growth. And we've tested this with a variety of international standards and shown that the films do not contain nutritive components for bacteria or fungi. Now for indoor air quality, our DuPont Tedlar wall covering film is actually GreenGuard Gold certified for both VOCs and for the mold resistance. For VOCs, what we found is that the Tedlar film can actually act as a barrier to release of VOCs from materials that it's laminated on top of, and can actually improve materials' performance in these GreenGuard air quality tests. And finally, PVF is naturally transparent and has low color, and it retains that low color even when it's used in harsh environments. And a transparent Tedlar film that's embossed will be extraordinarily scrub resistant, and so it's ideal for high traffic areas. So this gives you a versatile design with an enduring style. Now, that's a lot of claims, and we back our claims with extensive testing. So for cleaning and stain resistance, for example, we compiled a list of the worst materials that you would find in a healthcare environment. We apply it on Tedlar film and products made with Tedlar film on top, and let it sit for 24 hours or longer, and then determine what it takes to remove those materials. And you can see on this list, we have lipstick, we have hair conditioner, we have stomach acid, Sharpie markers, spray paint, iodine, red wine, all can be removed from the Tedlar, leaving no trace behind. For chemical resistance, we test our film with cleaners, solvents, and disinfectants, not by just spraying quickly and removing, but by extensive immersion tests and repeated applications to make sure our film will survive in the healthcare environment, even with the extreme frequency of cleaning and disinfection. And finally, we test our films in external labs with both bacteria and fungi to show that our films contain no nutritive components to support growth of mold, mildew, and bacteria to ensure that the air quality will be maintained throughout the life of the product. So for those reasons, Tedlar has been used in healthcare facilities for over 30 years. And you can find it all over the facility. Probably most popular is our DuPont Tedlar wall covering film, which has found a lot of traction in healthcare and in the hospitality industries, which also have some focus on cleanliness and disinfection. You can also find it, our partners have done many things with Tedlar film, including making ceiling panels, acoustic panels, doors, windows, furniture, cabinetry, and even flooring. All of these applications are motivated by upgrading the chemical resistance, the cleanability, and the durability of materials using DuPont Tedlar. So thank you very much for your attention. I believe now we're going to go to a short video.
Thanks very much, Mike. We're just running a poll now, but Velimira, if you'd like to take to the stage and introduce the panel, and we'll go from there.
Yes. Do you mind sharing the presentation which I have sent, please? Do you mind putting it in the presentation mode, please? Yes. Yeah, so I want to welcome everybody to our panel discussion today. We wanted to connect to Mike's presentation and talk how we will design spaces in the hospital in the future, especially as we experience in the moment a shift in the design parameters, how we see hospital planning. And this is very much affected by the importance which infection control and also cleanability are taking precedence in the hospital planning. This is why we choose this topic. And I wanted to introduce first myself. My name is Velimira Drama, and I'm an architect and interior leader at Stentex studio in London. I'm an architect, but I have big interest in the design for health, and I have been designing healthcare facilities around the world for 20 years. I have the pleasure to be joined also by highly experienced healthcare professionals, which you can see on the next slide. And I wanted to ask, please, everybody to start to introduce himself. Do you mind moving to the next slide, please? Alison, could you please start to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Hi, I'm Alison Wagner. I am the regional leader. I head up the healthcare practice for HOK in London. I have been designing hospitals for the last 30 years, and I've been working in the UK for the last 18. Kate? Kate, you're on mute.
Kate, you're muted. You're muted.
Hi, I'm Kate Woodwin. I work at Ramble Design Consultancy, Engineering Consultancy, which is an international consultancy. I'm based in the Bristol office. I've been working on healthcare for that last 10 to 15 years. So yeah, I'm a structural engineer by background.
Thank you. Christopher?
Hello, my name's Christopher Shaw. I'm an architect, founder of the consultancy Medical Architecture, and chair of Architects for Health. I've been designing hospitals for a jolly long time, so doing research and practice, and very much looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. Henning, please.
Yes, hi, my name is Henning Lensch. I'm CEO of RP International Hospital Planners here Singapore. So we are doing hospital projects. I'm personally doing hospital projects since 23 years all over the world. And I would like to bring in our experience to this here discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I believe Mai didn't manage to join yet. She had some technical problems, but she is the developer for healthcare in Ecophon. Hopefully she can join us. And Dan, may I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, of course. My name is Dan Flower. I'm a design director and principal at HKS Architects, particularly from their London studio, and I've been working on being part of HKS for 20 years now. Probably worked about 15 years of those in health design on and off. I work across studios. I don't necessarily specialize in health. I'm an architect by trade, but collaborate quite closely with the health studios in our international practice to look at everything from campus planning, master planning, all the way through to architectural proposals.
Great, thank you. And I just wanted for the audience to explain how we have structured the panel discussion. So we have three main parts. The first one is about healthcare planning. The second one is about materials and how the new shift of design parameters will affect the future materials. And the third one is how we see the interior design, the design of the spaces, how it will be affected by the pandemic and the new requirements. We wanted to start first with the healthcare planning. And the first question which I wanted to put to the panel is, what changes will the current COVID-19 pandemic bring to the future hospital space planning? And space planning is, for example, how we design clinics, especially do we need large waiting area with the introduction of telemedicine? How will be affected the different hospitals flow and the design of the different interior spaces and the components like receptions, nurse station, bedrooms, toilets, and many others. And of course, not at least hospitals are workplace for a lot of people. So how will the pandemic change the way we design workplaces in the hospital? And maybe, Alison, if you could start with one of the questions which we like to answer.
Yes, sure. I'm happy to start. I mean, it's been a very interesting time, as we all know. I know I personally left my office on March 18th and have not been back. And, our clients are asking, what are we doing different with our healthcare design and hospital design? And it is a challenging time right now and it's actually an exciting time for the NHS with all the new HIP projects. And what do we do differently? We certainly don't want what happened earlier, and we had to run out and build Nightingale hospitals. We don't want to close down hospitals as we did during the first part of the pandemic. HOK was involved with the Royal London Hospital. We did the initial design for Barts and the London, but during the pandemic, they actually asked us to fit out the top 2 floors of the hospital. for a COVID unit. And so it was quite different than the Nightingale hospitals that have been done. This is a freestanding, and it will be operational for the next 2 years. So we had to look at the flows of the hospital, an existing hospital, of how we separated the COVID patients and the staff that were dealing with the COVID patients from the rest of the hospital. We certainly don't want to ever have to cut down on surgeries again. So we were lucky. We were able to do it there. It was a large enough hospital. The footprint was big enough. There were separate entrances that we could use. But going forward, how do we actually do this in new hospitals? And that is separating the flows and actually looking at different areas of the hospital and working differently. Now, I know one of the things that the NHS did is similar to us. Everyone went and worked from home. That's including the consultants and the office staff. Speaking to some of our clients, about 50% did. So when we're looking at these new hospitals, do we actually need large clinics anymore, large clinic waiting areas? Do we need to put the offices in the hospital? You know, one thing we do know is hospitals are expensive to build, extremely expensive. So now that we have changed the way we work, and if we continue, and I assume that it'll be kind of a mix, half and half, do we need these large spaces? I mean, I think personally, and I'm sure the panel can chime in on this, I think there'll be a mixture, and I think we'll still need some of them, but they'll be smaller. We're doing a project right now in Ireland, and the clients actually asked us, you know, where does a clinician go and do telemedicine? Is it actually in a clinic, or do they have a separate area, or are they doing it in their homes? So we've actually designed separate areas now that they can go in cubby holes and do their clinics. So I don't know, Chris, what do you think? I mean, have you started to look at this?
Yeah, thanks for the pass.
Yeah,
well, I think it's a really interesting issue. I mean, the first thing I'd say is that this pandemic isn't new. We're living in an era when, you know, we've had MERS, SARS, there are the others, and I think that certainly this is affecting the world in an interesting way. It's an interesting challenge, but any moves that we make now, I think we need to consider the next 30, 40 years in hospital design, and there will be others. So as Alison said, you know, the three main challenges are isolation. How do you isolate groups? How do you cluster groups for efficient management, and how do you then organize flows? And I think that sort of drives the way that you think about staging waiting, it becoming much more of a staged process so that you don't get large groups in one place. We've got one hospital which is considering a drive-in model, which is certainly challenging. And I think that also we need to think about how you decontaminate more interestingly. It comes back to the sort of the DuPont, our sponsors area. And I think certainly the role of UVC in elevators and being able to decontaminate corridor areas rapidly. And whilst we're thinking about those techniques for decontamination, we also need to think about the internal environment. So one of the characteristics of COVID-19 in particular is the vitamin D seems to play a very big role. Well, hey, you know, as architects, engineers, designers around the table here, you know, can we do something about vitamin D with our lighting schemes? You know, we should be able to, within the design of the building, combat some of those symptoms. So I think there are really interesting challenges ahead. And I'm going to pass this on to, I don't know, somebody else who wants to pick up the baton. Henning, go on.
Yes, okay, so, right. So I think what we are learning now is, for example, there is a difference between the impact, in my opinion, for the developed world and for the emerging world. We see a lot of things in the developing places and countries, in the emerging countries, where people are afraid to go to a hospital. And I believe strongly that we are coming back to the main principles of good hospital design in terms of bringing back the principles of design and allowing people not to be afraid. And all your points are absolutely right. I believe we have to come out with a segregation of patient groups. So if you allow me to say it, I believe we're coming back to the main principles again of hospital design, of good hospital design. What is healing environment? How much support from the technical parts we really want to have? Is it better to have natural cross ventilation maybe? What can people afford? How can we provide for the larger group of patients who have not much money, good treatment? We see it now for COVID, for the mild cases, for the request, or for people looking for intensive care ICU, which is very expensive. So as an architect for hospitals, let us go back to the history and look back to TB or other kind of crisis that we have already seen in the past, and what was the response that time. So I believe strongly there will be an impact, there will be change of hospital design, but maybe for the better. For the better in terms of rethinking the hospitals that we have designed and built in the past. And I believe strongly it will be a smart hospital using the materials we have now available that have not been available 100 years ago, using the principles of mobile phones and every other e-health and other aspects. So I'm not pessimistic, I'm very optimistic that this challenge will bring us maybe to the better hospital.
I think this is a very interesting question which you did raise, Henning, and this brings us maybe to the next question, which is about flexibility. I'm just trying to change the slide. 1 second, sorry. So very often we talk that a lot of units in the hospital should be designed in a flexible way so that the functions can be changed and respond to different pandemic, different challenges. Is flexibility the key word for the design of the future facilities, and how you see the pros and contras for it? Kate, can you maybe start with that question?
Yes, I think obviously flexibility is key, and looking at the way understanding how hospitals are going to change for the foreseen and unforeseen kind of situations that may happen. But one of the things to consider is flexibility versus efficiency of design. And the more flexible the space is, the more expensive it's going to be, because it has to allow for change, it has to allow for, reducing the vibration, allow a larger grid to allow flexibility, and that adds cost to the design, to the actual structure. So it's key that we only put in, NHS will only pay for flexibility where it's actually required, and that can be done by zoning different areas and looking at the kind of what performance is required, and then rating performance spaces by high performance to low performance. For example, theatres, etc., and high dependency areas will be need high flexibility, and they may need a high level of floor to ceiling height and vibration control, whereas other rooms, for example, consulting rooms or clinical offices and inpatient rooms, will need less flexibility. And it's how we then, at the very outset, it's key to look at this to ensure the layout takes into account, so that you can then allow flexibility to exist, but then also make sure you're not going to overspend on certain areas. It's also a balance between also the carbon footprint of the building. The more flexibility you allow, the more expensive it is, the more heavy it is, and the more the bigger the carbon footprint. So you have to consider that as well, and that's obviously going to be key, and it is key now, will be even more key in the future. And then also looking into modern methods of construction. A lot of those are either modular or component driven, or perhaps CLT, in which case, or timber paneled buildings. And if we want to go down that route, which then have significant advantages of program and time and high turnaround, which is what we're also going to want to have to allow this flexibility, then we have to make sure that we plan that in at the very beginning, so we can then have zones which are low performance or high performance, and they can be interchangeable within that, so that you might have clinical rooms and bed walls or bedrooms that can be changed over, and that's how you can allow flexibility but not overspend on your project. So that's going to be the key things. And so I think one of the things is long life loose fit, so you enable for transformation, but you have to plan for unknown and then have your zones. And there's also things that we can do for flexibility, which is having allow for space for plants. So the service zones will potentially get bigger and allow for that. So and also have soft zones in the building so we know we can penetrate those. So we have to plan, but we can only plan to a certain extent and only allow that to affect, allow flexibility where it really is required. Another thing we've been looking at is having kind of a digital twin of our buildings. So, for example, your structural data can be embedded into the on the BIM model. So in the future, you can then use that information to see where adaptations can be made within the constraints of the building as it was originally designed. So you're right, flexibility is key, but it really has to be balanced against lots of other things, which are other constraints.
Yes, please, Alison.
Thanks. I can give you some examples of exactly what Kate was talking about with zoning. In the new Papworth Hospital that we designed, one of the things that we did for next to the theaters and the cath labs, we actually put what we call soft space. So there is an open plan office that we know when it's time to add more theaters. Actually, they can add 2 more theaters and 2 more cath labs. It's next to the theater department. So we can actually construct it without interrupting the theaters at this point so that they know they have that flexibility in the future to add 4 more theaters. One of the things that we also did, and I think all of us can speak to this, is one of the things that we see from the trust, the NHS, when we get the schedule of accommodation, it's also very departmentally driven. And one of the things that we did at Papworth, we really broke down the departmental boundaries, which, trust me, was not easy. So for the clinics, usually the doctors and the clinicians, they kind of have their own domain. They have their own offices in there. They have their own clinics or consultant exam rooms. So we actually took the offices out of the clinics and we made the clinics flexible. So basically, if you had a clinic that ran on Wednesday and you needed 15 consultant exam rooms, that you could take 5 from the next clinic if they didn't need it. So they're completely flexible for time and for space. So it's worked out very well with them and they're quite happy. But it did take the trust really wanting to change the way they worked. So it was difficult, but we got there in the end.
I think it's key what you said earlier, Alison, about flexibility in terms of people, consultants may work also from home, so there'll be more online consultations. And so those spaces are going to be then used, but there may be more requirement for critical beds and or inpatient beds. So then obviously looking at that and allowing that flexibility early on in the design to say that we can reassign these spaces within certain bounds is really useful.
We're also, speaking of beds, we're actually looking at it so that we can do what we're calling universal beds. So these beds can be adaptable, and it's really for the size, and it will add additional cost if you put more different equipment in, if it's an ICU or an HDU bed or an inpatient bed, but the size is there so they can adapt over time when needed. And then obviously, depending if there's a pandemic, we have to look at the airflows and that being able to change. So we are looking at that too.
And I think that's key, Alison, and it goes back to what Kate was talking about as well. We've been looking at a couple of studies, both internationally and in the UK, called the Flex studies, and recently published kind of a what-if scenario on how a hospital might cope with a surge scenario or a pandemic scenario. And it does come down a lot to space and having those conversations around how you utilize space and how you massage a schedule of accommodation. I think perhaps the next step for us is to reset some of that conversation so that what Kate's talking about, what Alison's talking about, and equally what Henning's talked about as well, bringing back good principles, not shrink wrapping things to the smallest they can possibly be, but thinking a little bit further, a little bit deeper along the lines of what that space might need to be used as on an ongoing basis. We're beginning to look into how the hospital might change over a 1, 5, 10 and 20-year basis, because even in the design of the HIT projects now, these aren't going to be built and operational for a number of years, in which time we will have seen advances in medicine. And is what we're designing allowing us to update in the design process such that a brief given could update with new requirements? And in what Kate's talking about, I think something that we're finding as well is about laying down a base set of principles of how you design out a space or spaces, thinking about their longer term adaptability, but also getting a bit more granular perhaps around the idea of what flexibility is and helping educate clients on when we use this word, what do we really mean? Is it about being able to modify a space? Is it about a space being versatile so that it can be used for a number of things without a modification of its internal environment? All the way to what Alison talks about in universal rooms, about how you can change the environment of that room so it becomes more multifunctional. And also what we're seeing emerge in kind of design team thinking more than one occasion, I think, was what Kate was mentioning about almost beginning to zone spaces of low, medium and high specifications and developing kind of sample specifications around those areas. And so we're beginning to contain where that flexibility lies. So you aren't asking one room to be all things to all people. So and I think there does need to be some education around that. And so perhaps coming out of this pandemic, some more research published on what types of change that we looked at and had to accommodate. And so the writing of briefs when they come out in the future perhaps takes that step up in I suppose wisdom and based on research. So we know what we're asking for. We know perhaps how much we're looking to spend on the most expensive spaces in hospitals versus cheaper spaces. And equally to the point of telemedicines, which spaces we're asked to be interchangeable or soft spaces that can be changed out of the initial footprint of the hospital so that we can expand departments internally. I think all of those at some point need to fold over into the briefs that we help write or help negotiate, and that will perhaps be a step change that we can make from this pandemic into the next set of hospitals.
Yeah, that's very, very good point. And I would like to move then to the next question, which is connected with it. 1 second, I'm just trying to move the slide. And this is practically, we talk about flexibility, we talked about online health, and will this online health be the answer actually to the how we design in the future the hospitals? Also, we are seeing that a lot of the population is living actually in the development countries in Asia, and they are dealing very different with the pandemic as we hear in Europe and US. So the question is, how do you see the implementation of the online health in the different parts of the world and what benefits it will bring? So it's quite interesting question, how this is combined flexibility, online health, how look the future of these hospitals in the different parts of the world? Who would like to start maybe with that? Henning? Yeah?
Yeah, of course, I have the advantage being now in Southeast Asia, in here Singapore. And to be honest, as a European, I'm learning here a lot about how quickly things are changing and how quick things should change. And I think the whole issue of e-health, of what we are seeing already now in our normal life, will be much more seen in the hospitals. So I believe strongly that this e-health and the aspects from the telemedicine will change the hospital design, will influence it to more economic ways. And I can tell you in Southeast Asia, you are learning a lot about economy, about what people can afford and how to make it more efficient. So I think there will be a strong driver to make healthcare and hospitals more affordable and to bring in all technology which is available here in Southeast Asia, especially. Everybody has a smartphone, everybody's using it much more maybe than in Europe, I believe so. And this changer will bring a lot of effects and bring advantages for people, reducing the cost for investment and maybe bringing back the idea of the core hospital that was already in Europe a good idea maybe 15 years ago, meaning that of course we have the need of operation theater, we have the need of intensive care, there is no question about that, but rehabilitation, outpatient clinics and other satellite functions are not necessarily close to the core hospital with intensive care and operation theaters. You see the trend also in the Nordic regions, in Denmark and other parts of the world. So what I think is that we need to learn from all the regions and learn to try to see this pandemic situation as a chance to push e-health and other solutions, to really bring it more to the people and change the hospitals and have discussions. I like the discussion we had just before for the stakeholders to understand that the architects, healthcare professionals can give an impact for programming, for aspect, as we have mentioned already, for schedule of accommodation. So again, I think all of us have to be part of this discussion, and we should also avoid and learn from the past that the schedule of accommodation should be flexible and allow for the impact of these changes now. Thank you.
Yeah. Here is also connected a question which we didn't answer. How will this affect the workplace? Because hospitals is not only for patients, it's also for staff. Do you think we need big open plan office spaces in the hospitals anymore, or will be done in a different way when we move towards online health? Christopher?
Well, I think that you're still going to need workplaces and people are going to work together. I think that there's probably likely to be a short-term move to cellularization, managed airflow, all of the things that we talked about in managing patient groups equally apply in workplaces. So the flows, the clustering, the ability to isolate and so on. But I think that the impact of technologies on, for example, algorithmic diagnosis is going to have a very significant impact on the kind of workforce and the way that we structure hospitals, because outpatients departments aren't going to be the way, in a very few years, aren't going to be the way that they are at the moment because of that. And I think it's also useful to consider that with most populations in Western areas being increasingly older, presenting with complex illnesses, we're going to see a new kind of medicine, which is probably nearer air traffic control, where we look at complex diagnoses, help with computers, multidisciplinary teams, dealing with population health, a lot of it outside hospitals, but you need somewhere to do that. So think more like, as I say, air traffic control than traditional multidisciplinary teams working together. So I think the kind of workplace is going to be a little bit different, and it's the challenge to the designer is to make that a civilizing, attractive place to work, because these are clinicians are very, very high value people.
Yeah, this is a very interesting aspect. Somebody else you want to add something?
I was going to say we are working on the case of hospital in Denmark at the moment with kind of AGVs, automated guided vehicles, and on pneumatic tube system been around for quite a long time, but AGVs are a new area which is becoming more predominant, and I was wondering whether will become, it's got automated bed washing, for example, and distributing medicines and other material around the building. So, and that's obviously then in a separate, has to be integrated in the design very early on in the process, because it needs a whole different system. In this case, we have a separate basement, which is just for the AGVs, and that does limit then the amount of contact that the materials have when they're being moved around the building with people. So that I can imagine that would be something that would be considered in the future, which in any event, AGVs are becoming a more significant aspect of hospitals, and it has to be, even if definitely for large hospitals, that has to be designed for, even if it's not being built in at the very beginning, but it has to be allowed for in the future so that it can be converted. So that would be in terms of vibration control on floors, flatness of floors, just allowing additional space in risers, etc., as I said before, so that you can actually then have AGVs in the future, if not now.
Are there any negative aspects about flexibility and online health? How do you see it? Is it everything so positive, or is there something which we need to consider?
Can you just allow me to give maybe one? I just want to say that the promises of flexibility, we have to be very careful. Since years, we're talking about flexibility and what is possible with being flexible, but we have to see the restrictions, because we're talking about healthcare infrastructure, we are talking about MEP and other things. So we need to be reasonable with the promise by us as the architects for the flexibility. E-health, we also have to understand that we have to reach out to all the people, also the elderly people and all. We should not exclude people and groups of people. These are the 2 points I wanted to bring in.
Yeah, Dan, you wanted
Yes.
to add something?
I did. I'm trying to remember what.
Yes, please.
I think getting specific about flexibility is one thing. I think that a few who have spoken have touched on that. Understanding what it is we want to do with the space and being, not everything needs to be a Swiss Army knife, which is very, very highly engineered and can do all things, but isn't one thing in itself. So there are different types of spaces, and perhaps there's some work to do in building clients' understandings around some of these issues. I think research done now with so many people working from home and to understand the outputs of that research could be absolutely invaluable in going back to be able to give clients data on and research proved solutions to say this did work but that didn't. And so we don't take all of the things, we take all of the things that we learned, but we don't necessarily take all of the things that we've been doing. There will be good practices and bad practices in that. There may well be a perception that lack of contact time or contact time through devices, as Henning said, doesn't necessarily include all the population. Well, there's a perception around that you're not getting the quality of healthcare because you aren't in a room seeing somebody. So there's a perception thing with patients and users as well.
Yeah.
That isn't going to become easily everywhere. It's about education, and it's about kind of tried and tested methods. And with the work Kate's doing in Denmark with AGVs, it's something that we're still learning about, and we are able to account for and put into buildings. But the more we do it, the more we're able to provide that case study for clients to say, we know that you haven't done this before, but there are really good reasons for doing it. So it's this accumulation of case studies, testing, research, and wisdom from design professionals to say these are calculated risks that we take, or this is a way of allowing your project to step into the future, even though we have a limited data set on the impact of doing this. We know X, Y, and Z, and therefore we can recommend that these things work, and that helps us go forward.
Yeah. And then maybe we move to the next question, which is saying that the pandemic brings to the table a lot of new requirements concerning the hospital facilities. So do all these requirements need to be incorporated in the client brief stage or in the design standards? And also, how can we as healthcare experts make significant change in terms of policy? So it's important because in the moment we are still getting old briefs which don't respond to the new requirements. So how do we react? How is the process? How can we make the difference? Who would like to start? Christopher, please.
Yeah, hello. I worked with the NHS and Public Health England on when the pandemic started, developing the standard operating procedure across the UK for pandemic, and it was very interesting. The challenges were really around what the availability of the workforce, as much as physical environment, respirators, and so on. So the standards and guidance actually aren't that different from much of what we have already. That you just need to overlay some stuff that's been around for a very long time. If you go back and look at Florence Nightingale's Rencoy Hospital, 1855, that has very good pandemic and disease management standards built into it, because it was all about air movement of sewage and contaminated. And it's a very good essay in how to do it. It was also a 1,000-bed hospital designed in 6 days, which I think is quite a good standard to set. So I think that many of the standards are there. I think it would probably be difficult to update all of the design standards to meet the requirements of this pandemic. I think we just need to have a sense of resilience in our design standards. I think there are probably too many design standards for hospitals out there at the moment, and that they become out of date very rapidly. And this pandemic, I think, illustrates the problem.
Yeah, somebody else who want to contribute to the question?
Yes, I think what you said is absolutely right. There are already good standards. If you look through the standards, there's everything about infectious diseases and how to make infection control. I strongly believe also what you're saying, we should try to harmonize the standards, and we should also pay respect that not every country can afford the standards that are especially in the Western standards. So I think there are already good answers, but my opinion is we should bring stakeholders to the table and to allow for more flexibility for the interpretation and for the adaptation of these standards that are now available. This is what we learn and see a lot in the emerging world is really necessary to respond not only to the developed world, but also to the emerging world. So this is my short answer about the standards. However, I see a strong need for a reform, and we should also, as healthcare architects and the professionals, should work together to bring this kind of adaptation to the standards.
Yeah. In that case, I will, if nobody wants to contribute more, I will move to the next big section, which is materials. Okay. So we want to talk about materials because materials are very much affected of the current shift of parameters due to COVID-19 pandemic. And the questions, what materials do you think will become more prominent with an eye on infection control? And we wanted to touch on the big discussion, antibacterial and antimicrobial materials. They are very popular, but they have plus and minus. So who would like maybe to start talking about materials? Mike?
Yeah, I can start on materials. So I think that durable and cleanable materials are really going to be most important for the future going forward. And it's combining those materials with a good design. So if we combine durable, cleanable materials with a seamless and streamlined design that's easy to clean, we'll be in a much better place to be managing healthcare-acquired infections and the spread of disease. And the trick is doing that without getting a highly institutional feel. And I think there's a lot of clever people out there and a lot of clever designs that you're starting to see robust materials being used in ways that don't look too institutional and too stuffy. Now for antimicrobial and antibacterial, that's something that we've gotten a lot of inquiries about recently. There seems to be a hot topic in multiple industries. The important thing to realize about these, the way they work is typically there's an active ingredient that's included in the material, and it slowly leaches out of the material over time and comes to the surface. And similar to how materials are disinfected, if you have dirt and debris and organic matter on the surface, that will either impede the contact between the antimicrobial and the microbe, or it'll occupy the antimicrobial ingredient and prevent the mode of action from being effective. So you still need to clean antimicrobial materials. So it can't lull you into a sense of security that says, oh, I have an antimicrobial material, I don't need to clean it anymore. No, you still have to clean it. And then because it's got these active ingredients that leach out slowly over time, I'd say the toxicity of those materials is a bit unknown right now. And also because you're losing the active material over time, the efficacy is going to decrease over time. So that's another big question around these antimicrobial additives. And then finally, microbes do develop resistance to antimicrobial materials over time. And we've seen this with silver ion-based technologies, that microbes will evolve and they will develop resistance, and you could be breeding superbugs in your facility, and that's certainly something we don't want.
So would you recommend the designers not to use antimicrobial materials? Or what will be your recommendation for interior designer, for example?
Well, there might be a role to play for antimicrobial materials, but you do need to think critically about where they would fit in. Certainly, if you want to put antimicrobials in a structure that's designed to last for decades, it's probably not the best material because the efficacy is usually not designed to last that long. But in something that's a little lower on the range of durability, maybe there is a role to play there. It's just something you do have to be careful about. And you have to plan for using those materials appropriately. You still need to clean and disinfect.
So probably you're suggesting more for materials which doesn't need a long duration, the long lifespan. We can use them, but not for elements with a long lifespan, I would say.
Well, certainly not for elements for a long lifespan. For elements with a shorter lifespan, I'd still be a bit careful with them because of the ability to breed bacteria that are resistant to the mode of action, lull you into this false sense of security, and the unknown toxicity. So those are things that I would look out for.
Interesting is also the question, unfortunately Mai is not in the conversation, but if we use too many smooth and hard materials to meet the infection control requirements, how do we deal with the acoustic? We don't use any carpet anymore. In certain countries, we use carpet in waiting areas, not in the UK. So are we capturing everything with the ceiling? Or this is an interesting question. So we need to be careful how we deal with acoustics. Any opinion on that from the panel?
Well, you do, because acoustics affect communication, stress, a lot of physiological behavior. And if you enter, I mean, poor communication is a clinical risk. Presenting, if your physiology is being affected by stress from the acoustics, your blood pressure goes up, so you're presenting incorrectly, and the environment has a significant part to play in that. I think I was very interested in what Mike was saying there. I think one of the really interesting things to note is within an acute hospital, the number of areas where absolutely very high levels of infection control are required are very few. ICUs, operating theatres, pretty much that's it. Everywhere else in the hospital, there will be an environmental flora. It's just like our bodies. We carry microbes around with us. It's just that they're not all pathogens, and it's an awareness that the environment that we design is very seldom going to be absolutely free. What we need to do is to design a balanced environment. And I think Henning talked about cross ventilation, natural ventilation. Use it, in a way, using what the body's used to out there to its best advantage. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. And it certainly reduces the challenge that all of us designers have about how do we minimize the use of VOCs or production of VOCs. Again, I think something that Mike touched on, how do we design environments which can recycle, have a good end of life recycling. And a lot of what goes into hospitals at the moment doesn't fit particularly well with that. So I think that in terms of designers, certainly thinking about those long life materials and having a gradation of those areas really need to be absolutely a near sterile environment to those areas which are more livable. And I think that graduation and thinking about that graduation is the real challenge.
Yeah, thank you.
So just to quickly comment on the durability of materials, one thing that we've heard, which was kind of interesting, is that there's the regular cleaning procedure of the hospital, but then there's patient behaviors as well. So a patient will come in, they'll sit down, they'll pull out their disinfecting wipe, and they'll start wiping everything down. So you also do need to plan that into your durable materials. And it's not going to be fun if you're throwing out your furniture every other year because it's falling apart because someone keeps taking an ethanol wipe to it.
Yeah, thank you. I will just move to the last questions because we are getting already some questions for the audience and we have 15 minutes to answer everything. So the next chapter is interior design. And the interesting part is that in the last 20-30 years, we worked towards developing a very welcoming interior designs, which doesn't look like hospital. So we got a lot of inspiration for hospitality, residential design. We tried to create funky, nice spaces. And now is coming COVID-19 pandemic, and she is putting different parameters. So we need to create physical barrier, separation, hard materials. And the question is, how do we see a solution to these problems? Somebody to want to take maybe the first step, Henning? I see you you wanted to take part. Sorry, Alison, you also up.
Okay, go ahead, Henning.
No, sure. Yes, actually, this is of course the right question. In the past, we are all thinking about more like a living room environment. Now we go to the hospital and have to put on a mask and whatever we do, and there are doors to close it up from us and other. I think the answer is, again, it is a harmonization and integration. I don't think that now the hospital design will change and we will not have anymore a kind of the welcoming atmosphere. I don't think so. We have seen today great materials, very innovative for a smart hospital. I think the question is how we designers, how the architects will respond to it. I still believe that the issue that we have and had and still have is how to make people not being afraid to go to a hospital. And I don't think there is a conflict between these new requirements. I think the answer is the harmonization of a smart hospital with smart surfaces that we have learned, with smart ways of avoiding airborne infections like we have now for the COVID-19. But we have, especially as healthcare architects and designers, to really take care that we are creating an environment without people being afraid, without people don't want to go to a hospital anymore. This is a challenge, but I don't think this is a contradiction.
Okay, thank you. Alison, please.
I agree with Henning. I think it's a challenge, and I don't think we're going to go back to Nightingale hospitals and very sterile hospitals. I think we've learned a lot, especially bringing natural daylight into hospitals, lowering sills of windows so people get better vistas looking out, bringing natural materials. I mean, you have a picture of a lot of timber in there, which is quite beautiful, and it's much more relaxing. So, I don't think we'll be back to where we were before. And I think, digital technology is going to help that. We don't need everyone coming to a waiting room at once. We can actually send them a text. You don't even need a special app. Now everyone has a mobile phone. And I actually think it's nice that it's going to become more intimate, that, you're not sitting in large waiting areas. You can sit with your family and it's a much more private space. So I do think it's an opportunity now that we have.
Great, thank you.
So just to add on that real quick, composite materials have come a long way. So you can still use natural materials together with modern materials, make laminates, and get the aesthetic that you want together with the durability and cleanability. So that is something that has changed over the past number of years.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. Thank you, Mike. I just wanted to go to the last question before we go to the public questions. So the last question is that, especially now in the global world of the pandemic, the personal health is moving to the forefront. And one of the tools which we're using is biophilic design, because we as humans, we are creatures which are connected to the natural world. So, for example, bringing natural elements, natural light, greenery in the spaces, which is very difficult in the hospitals, or natural materials is ever a plus and helps for the person to feel better. Do you think biophilic design and design for wellness in general will now be seen by clients as a must-have factor or not as a luxury any longer? Because very often these little extras, the client looks in the budget and just cross them out from the design. So how do you see this problem? Do you think the COVID will change something in this direction?
I think it was happening before COVID anyway. I think that, and it's not only a sort of nice to have. I think it improves recovery rates. It improves, recruitment, retention of staff. There are so many things at play here that in terms of the organisation and running of a good hospital, the quality of design and the comfort of the interior play into the whole ethos of the organisation. So, you know, I don't think there's anything new here, and I don't think the pandemic is going to necessarily accelerate it. I think it was all already moving fairly fast.
Yeah.
I was going to just add about, you know, the use of biophilic materials in terms of timber, using that as a structural material as well, and then having that as potentially in some situations an exposed surface. So we've done some healthcare facilities that have cross-laminated timber solid panels, and that just as an environment, as you said before, is you just said is very healing, and it reduces the heart rate. I mean, I don't know if that's entirely scientifically proven, but it is kind of shown that it can be timber and natural materials do improve the, as you say, recovery times, and yeah, and that also then brings on to the, you know, carbon neutral, and that will be pushed more and more in the future. So we're going to have to look down that anyway, and then also fitting out buildings internally using timber as a material fit out. Obviously, there's the issues with the infection control, but I think the hospital are doing in Denmark at the moment, I find it's quite interesting. They're using the timber as along the corridors as kind of buffers to the edge of corners, because it's a material that can be then repaired or new timber reinstated where it gets damaged. And obviously refitting buildings is a massive cost and a massive carbon footprint. So using timber in that environment, I think is also a great idea. So just use of timber generally as fit out and also as a building material, I think great on many fronts.
Great, thank you. In that case, we have 10 minutes to answer also public questions. 1 second, I will just. So the first question, I think, is more to Mike. What adhesive is recommended to laminate Tedlar Pvf to wall coverings?
Yeah, so Tedlar is a fluoropolymer, but we do treat the surface so it can be used with adhesives. So if you're looking at just sticking Tedlar to a surface, we have a variety of different adhesives that we can use. So if you contact us, we have a whole application development team that can help connect you with the right adhesives. Specifically to wall covering, DuPont Tedlar wall covering can be applied just like any other wall covering using traditional methods. The one advantage of the Tedlar wall covering is if you do get some adhesive that seeps around to the front of the wall covering, it's a fluoropolymer, so you can easily clean it off. So it's actually much easier to install.
Great, thank you, Mike. The other question is, I guess, to Kate. Do you believe technical rooms can be flexible, such as operation room, etc.?
Well, I
So
think
it's more about flexibility. Yeah.
Yes, I think that's more kind of perhaps the point I made earlier, which was that they have to be within the bounds of the limits within the criteria for those rooms. So then if you classify rooms as high performance, medium and low performance, then within that bound of high performance, you can have flexibility between rooms. But yes, as you say, theatres are going to have a high requirement on vibration, on services requirements, on floor to ceiling heights, and those things need to be set. But it might be the flexibility is that you have a space that could be divided into a number of theatres, or it could also then be used for other high performance spaces, for example, critical care beds or emergency care, and you would then have an area in the hospital which would be flexible within the bounds of being high performance. So I think you can't reduce those limits, but Alison.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just saying that we have built in flexible spaces next to theaters. You know, sometimes we will put storage areas next to theaters. So if you want in the future to put a hybrid theater in, you already have the space to do that. So it's building in that flexibility into the theaters.
Yeah.
It's a very similar story to the way that we've been thinking as well, Alison, interrogating the brief and then looking into the future, planning for the future, and then peeling back to say what are the likely increases in the critical function of each department, what can give way in that department to allow this internal scalability or internal increase in size and capacity. And then how do you plan in that space? So I do believe technical rooms can be made to be flexible. That's also kind of reflected in their MEP requirements as well. If you plan in higher air changes, then you have kind of elongated or sort of greater numbers of procedures that can take place in a given room. For instance, you can make a room more able to do more things, not everything, but you can expand its use, make it more multifunctional with just bits of thinking in the right area. And that goes back to what Kate was talking about in zoning these rooms and putting them in the right places, giving them the right environmental support, structural support, and sort of zoning the specification of them, so we know there's technical flexibility within the use of each of those rooms in future.
Great, thank you, Dan. We have another question. We are all getting used to queuing and 2 meter distance. How can this be incorporated into the hospital designs, whilst also allowing views to nature, daylight, encourage people to walk and keep fit, to make sure people are as resilient as the hospital design? So do you think this rule will stay, will be incorporated? Alison, please.
Well, you know, we've been looking at this for years. First thing, one of the things with new technologies, as we were talking about with your smartphones, with apps, you really shouldn't have to be waiting in queues. You should be scheduling appointments. You could actually go to get a coffee or walk outside. But I don't think there's any reason to actually stand in a queue in a hospital, especially with the technology that is coming on board and we already have. We did an outpatient center for the Royal National Orthopedic Hospital, which was probably opened 8 years ago. And we actually gave them buzzers. You know, when you go to a restaurant and your table's ready, the buzzer goes off. And that was a technology years ago that we used, but we didn't want people sitting in the waiting rooms and waiting. We wanted them to be able to go outside and have a walk. And I think technology is getting better and better, and so we shouldn't have to do that. And it's exactly what we were talking about. The size of waiting areas don't need to be as big as they were before.
Yeah, great, thank you. We are almost at time. We have 2 minutes to answer the last question. Interior finishes packages are often under budget constraints as the last packages to be produced. How can the required budget for robust solid surface be ring-fenced? Does it need some directive or inclusion in the HTM guidance? Is the last question. Somebody?
I don't think it should go into the guidance. I think it's educating clients early on, and in my career, it's very frustrating, and it is the one thing that gets valued engineered a lot is the interiors, because we need the building, we need the clinical spaces, but it's those soft spaces and those soft touches that usually get valued engineered out. But I do think that our clients are getting much better educated, and it's in all the briefs now, and that's what they want. They want these beautiful healing environments, and we know that it is a very important part about getting better to have natural daylight, beautiful areas. So I think it's education.
Yeah,
absolutely
great.
agree. I absolutely agree with Alison there. Don't put it in the guidance unless you know how to take it out again. So generally there's far too much stuff in guidance. It really has impact if it's in the brief. That's where it matters.
Yeah. So we are all positive looking forward for the design of the hospital. Sorry, Dan, please.
I was going to say, if you look at the space that's on screen now, two of the walls don't need extra finishes or sort of extra decoration, because you've got perhaps a well-placed waiting space there that's got external views and vistas, which is what we've been talking about. Access to a good view out, some greenery that we can see on the side. I think that points to, if you get spaces in the right place in the planning of the hospital, you're waiting in the right areas if you need to wait, and you've right-sized the waiting spaces, then sometimes you're not having to over-design that space because it's buried in the center of a deep plan space in a slightly elongated corridor or something. And so back to an early point Henning made, is that we can look back to look forward and go back to some good principles of getting things in the right place. And so we don't need to design our way out of problems that we design in, because if we get things in the right place and we understand a lot, or we bring good design practices to the likes of waiting areas where they're needed, then I think we can overcome some of the needs to kind of overcompensate in a way of getting things in the right place. That just comes from good design practice, and it's something that all the designers on the call are aware of at the moment and would support. And so it's doing it right. It's having the right time in which to do that, and it's having good and well-educated clients and being able to dialogue with clients in a way to get things in the right places, allocate them in the right space, not have to design your way out of problems that you design your way into. So it's all possible. It's just incumbent on a lot of us doing our jobs well and using our understanding and our education of others, and having good dialogues with all stakeholders to make sure that there is a common understanding as to what good design is and how we achieve good environments.
Yeah, thank you. Somebody else? We are almost running now out of time. It's just maybe last sentence if somebody wants to end the conversation.
I just want to say now to Dan, this was a very good summary, Dan, because it is bringing back the point that we are designers. We should now bring good solutions and be innovative and come out with, from our side as a hospital architects and designers, for the smart hospital solutions. And we should drive also the discussions about the programming with all the stakeholders. I believe we will see stressed budgets, less money available, so we need to be aware of it. I don't believe we will have more money in the future for more nice things. I believe we will be having more challenges with the budget.
Yeah. Alison, you wanted to add something?
Basically what Henning and Dan had said, one of the things that we do is that we make sure, as my background is an interior designer, and I have to say when I started in designing hospitals years ago, basically the architects and the medical planners would do, their design, and they would hand it over and say what color the walls want to be, which I found very annoying. And it's just working together. It's working as one team and educating the clients. So it's exactly the same.
Yeah. This reflects also my experience that is ever a fight to keep the budget for the interior design of the end, and you need to be really very inventive and clever and really to fight to have the design implemented. And it's important that interior designers involved from the beginning on the project, that they can look on the interior of the spaces. Thank you very much for the discussion. I wish we had 1 hour more because there's so much to discuss, but we needed to finish it as we are running out of time. And hopefully there will be another panel and we can all meet again and discuss further. Thank you a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so
Bye,
much.
everybody.
Thanks so much to our moderator, Belimira, Mike, and all of our panelists, and to everyone who has joined us in the audience today. An on-demand copy of the session will be available on the website, and of course the session is CPD accredited, so you'll receive your CPD certificate within 1 month of today's session. If you have any feedback or further questions, please drop us an email and we'll come back to you as soon as possible. Our next session of the series is taking place tomorrow at 10:30 AM, and it's a panel discussion on cleaner air, cleaner cities and cleaner construction. So thanks again, everyone. We hope you all stay safe, and we hope to see you all for the remaining sessions of the week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.